As the more easily got timber was cut out, horses were brought into the river system in about 1900 to haul logs from further back in the forest. Bob was stable boy for his father when he left school in 1935, firstly at Pine Cove in Macquarie Harbour. From all accounts, his father was a great man with horses.
My grandfather, John Crane, was the first man to bring horse teams into the Gordon. Well, he would have been the top horse driver on the West Coast, and they used to, the millers would have gangs in the Gordon with horse teams. They would nothing like that to get Jack Crane to go and drive their teams or look after their horses. He was excellent. Actually, I worked with Dad for years. From about 13, I think I started in the bush with him. And to see that fella handle horses, to drive horses, he didn't have to drive horses. He could be up at a couple of 100 yards away putting skids in the head of the horse team, and he'd whistle. And I could be standing behind him, and the leader would nudge, give a few nudges, and away they'd go. He didn't have to drive them. They knew him, and he was excellent with horses. I seen him down at Pine Cove. He had gone down there to relieve Harry Smith, the horse driver at the time. And he went down there 3 months relieving, and then he came back to Strahan. And I went down to Pine Cove to work as a 14-year-old as a stable boy. And Dad came down with Mr. George Smith, who was the boss at the time, and the horse drivers, what was there working there, they hadn't got any logs out to the beach. There was nothing. And Mr. Smith said to Dad, would you come out the road and see where they are? So we get to this hill and we could hear these people, jokers yelling and hollering and swearing and carrying on. And here they are with this 9 horses hooked to one log, and they got about halfway up this hill and they couldn't get any further. And Mr. Smith asked Dad if he'd help out. And Dad said, well, you'll have to go and ask the horse driver down there if I can do it. And he said, righto. And he come back and he said, yes. They said, if you can get a log to the beach, you're a good one. So Dad said, well, we'll take 4 of those horses off, and we'll just use 5. So he went and picked his 5 horses out and put them in the team where he wanted them, and as he went along them, the horses knew him. They just smelt him, and you could see that and he just spoke to them, and you could see their ears wiggling, and just sniff him and that. He run his hand along them, and then he just stood on the bank and he just whistled. And they just flattened out like one horse, and away they went. And these jokers said, well, we've heard of Jack Crane, but by God, I've never seen nothing like that. Yeah, they was just, way they went like one. And that's what he could do with a team of horses. No sore shoulders, no crimped feet or anything with him. Everything was, horses was beautiful, looked after.
And did you learn your skill from him?
Yes, well, yes. You had to learn, or you got to kick up the backside. You was taught one mistake. You was allowed one mistake, and you couldn't repeat that one the second time. Went out to the King with Dad when I was 13, out nearly to where the dam, Crotty Dam is now. We pulled Ewan Pine from under Mount Uxley and about a mile, and then we shot it down over into the King River. And that, when floods had come, to be washed down to the sawmill at Loana, Mr. Jones's mill there. From there, I think I went to the Gordon. Pine Cove. Yes, worked in Pine Cove, and that's where I tell you. And I ended up horse driving there. I was driving the 3-horse team there. Then I went to the Gordon from there.
And this was the lawn camp, was it?
No, I went to Cameron's Flat. That's along the Limekill Reach, the big long straight in the Gordon. Pulling King Billy pine there. And went from there back to Spring Creek, which isn't very far up the river from the mouth, 6 or 7 miles or something. And putting King Billy in there. And I put it back in, we'd pulled about 5 miles and put it in the creek there to float out to the river. Horses was never drove or reins or anything like that. They were drove by command from the horse driver. It was, come here, sung out in very strong language, "Way, come here," to the left, "Whoa, gee, back," to the right. "Oh, whoa," to stop, "Get up, you so-and-so's," to start. Or, as Dad used to do, nothing but a whistle. And they would follow at the right commands. Horses are very intelligent animals, you know that. Yeah, I know about them. And if you look after a horse as he's supposed to be looked after, they'll treat you with respect too.
In the very early 1920s, Roy Nielsen's father, Victor, was in charge of a logging operation at the Braddon River, which flows into the Macquarie Harbour. He was working for the Pine Export Company, who operated a sawmill in Strahan.
They knew their position of where they were, whether they was in the front of the team or not. A good leader, he won't let another horse take his place, really, or he'll bite or anything. Yes. And I don't know, they know their place. When it used to get dark in the Braddon, you know, I think I might have mentioned before, all we had to do, us kids, the old fella would leg us up onto a horse each. And it'd be real dark in the bush. The horse would find his way home. Stepping over logs and different things. He'd be heading for the stable. Yeah, that was how it was.
Good.
But of course, along that particular line, with horses and their leaders, like I often mention Bobby Crane's father as a real teamster, and he had a beautiful leader, a big black horse. And do you know, in cases like that, them horses smells. They smell you. And they know if you're friendly to them. You can tell by the look in their face. And it's a companionship between horse and man as to whether he'll give you his best efforts or not. I'm sure of that. That Jack Crane, Bobby's father, he could do anything with a horse, and all the horses, if it was a strange horse, used to smell him. Yeah. And he'd speak to him in a language I didn't think that I really understood him. As we were saying once, 4 horses could pull a pine log, but they had to pull together. And you can't always get them to pull together. You've got to be a good teamster to get them to pull together.
And just how did you do that, Roy? Get him to first one to...
Well, this is what they used to do. Now, this Jack Crane and Claude Morrison, they'd stand alongside of their leading horse. And they'd just speak to him quietly, stand up, or whatever. And then when they wanted him to pull, it was sometimes a whistle, a sharp whistle they used to do. The leader would take a strain. The other horses would see it or feel it, and then they'd take a strain and away they'd go. But if you never had that coordination, you'd have one horse pulling one after the other. They'd get frightened if they thought they'd going to be punished for it. Now you're in trouble. You had to get those team of horses to work as a team, and you could do anything with them.
One of the horses we had in the Gordon River, it was, I can't really tell you, a fella had hit it in the head with an axe. Cruel mongrel he was. He had the print of the back of the axe in his forehead. And we had this horse or Dad had it in his team. And I don't know whether it used to suffer with headaches or what, the poor bugger. But it was always in good nick. I used to look after the damn thing. But Dad could put it in the team and everything and do anything. And if I'd feed it of a night and carry bloody water, carry water to it and everything, as well as the other horses, but to go and put a box of chaff in its manger, I'd have to go in alongside the horse alongside of it and climb through the rails. If I went into it'd kick me out of the back of the stable or try to crush me up against the... And one day at the top of the chute, we used to pull logs and to the top of a cliff and we'd roll the logs over the bank and they'd go down a big chute down the hill. And I went to hook the horse, this leader's reins up over a snag on the side of the bank, and when I did, he ducked his head and he grabbed me by the ribs and lifted me off my feet. I had these big teeth marks in me for months. But that's what, anybody go into the stable, that's what he'd try to do, but Dad could do anything with him. And I don't know whether he had a hate on anybody after this fella hit him in the head with an axe or what it was. Dad had a short. He was the one in the rear of the team, the last horse in the team. And he going round corners, if he never had any brains or anything like that, and other horses, 3 or 4 horses in ahead of him, and they'd drag him in onto the banks and that sort of thing, and he'd have to take the whole load around a short corner. He'd lift it in one of his, lean over, and the horses ahead of him, he'd bite the next horse to get him out of the road if it wasn't quick enough. And once he got around the corner, he'd just relax. And Dad used to say to me, now look at that. This horse, he had a trooper, his name was. Geez, he was a beautiful nag. He'd say, now look at that. These so-and-so horse drivers had belt him. Reckon he's loafing. He just let the others take the weight while he's getting ready for the next corner. And that's what he'd do. He'd take a bit of the weight, but he'd ease up and get ready for the next corner. He had to go. Otherwise, they'd drag him up onto the bank and into this. When we finished down at, finished working the King Billy at Spring Creek, we had to travel the horses back to Cameron's Flat, which is from 6 mile up the river to about 20. It was a great big bend in the river, well, my finger.
That's good.
Great big bend in the river. It's not all that far from 6 mile up the river to 20 mile. So from where we was logging at the end of the Spring Creek Road, we was able to travel the horses about on a traverse track across to the Cameron's Flat job. It was about 3 mile, and we was able to travel the horses to Cameron's Flat, the only place we could load them on the boat. They was brought up on the old Gundy. We had about 8 at that time. Yeah. So we had to drive them. We had to build a bridge, sort of couple of spars and some planks and whatever, to walk them across from the bank to the deck of the Gundy, and sort of scramble them down there and onto the deck, and they had to travelling to Strahan from there. We came down the river. It was funny. I can't think of this old skipper's name. We had a nickname. I can't think. He was a bit blind. And we're coming down all the way from up Cameron's Flat, and we had to pull up opposite Spring Creek to get our gear, row in with the dinghy and pick our gear up off the bank and take it out to Gundy. And he sort of couldn't pull her up or steer her some damn thing. He was crashing through the pine edge and nearly swept the horses off the deck and all. It was a turnout. I can't know, Captain Jolly, I think his name was. Anyway, we got to Strahan all right. One of the most, was coming up out of, terrible steep up out of Pine, where he used to pull them from top end of Pine Creek to get them to the beach. There was fairly steep hills. And one particular place was around this gravelly corner, very hard. And as I say, Dad, sometimes we'd have to take one horse off the other three teams to help each one in difficult places. So I might take one of my horses and hook it onto Dad's, or he'd bring the other team, one of the other horses back from another team. And this particular day, he had this big Yuan pine. It was a tremendous, great, huge one, and it was hard. And they get to this damn corner, and to stop the shoe horses being pulled up onto the bank, he'd have to hook the lead teams over onto his one chain, so he wouldn't pull him so much over. And this big horse called Duke, he's a bit of a mad sort of a thing, he was, but he's a great, big, powerful mongrel. And when he spelled the horses and set them all up to go round this bend, and a cold day, and when they started to pull around and they're flat out as one horse, there's 6 horses, and the stones was flying from their hooves, and the big shoe horses laying out and giving his best. And it was, if you could have seen it, it was absolutely amazing to see those horses doing that with this damn great pine. Because once he got around the bend, just a whoa, stopped him, give him a blow, and rearranged his team again. And away they went. But it was something terrific to watch those horses that day, and that particular thing. It always stuck in my mind to see that. Yeah. The food for the horses, everything had to be taken in by boat to the Gordon, and you had chaff, big bags of chaff, oats and bran to be mixed together in their feed.
Well, when the horses worked in the Gordon River and anywhere on the Yuan Pine, to my knowledge, there was no green feed. The work horses, all on Yuan Pine. There was no paddocks of green feed or pasture for them. So they had bran, oil cake, and this was part of their diet. And bran, oil cake, and their main diet was oats and chaff and stuff. And about every fortnight or so, if you kept your eye on them, the horses, and their manure was that hard you could nearly lay a road. Like it's like when you could kick it about and throw it around like bloody lumps of rock. Well, if it got too hard, you'd give them a pound of Epsom salts, and that would clean them out. That was horses. That's the stomach part. And as for their feet, well, my experience of that was you had a penknife with a good. You had to have a penknife with a good narrow wire, not a narrow penknife, not a bloody wide one. Narrow, like a thin. And you tapped the hoof, and you found the horse at the moment you tapped where it was, where he was jarred, he'd have a jarred hoof through working in the stones. Their shoes didn't last very long, they had to be shod pretty regular. And there were no trouble to shoe, providing they didn't have sore feet. And that was a bit of a bugger, a bit of a problem. But I had a little bit to do with it, and not a lot to do with horses, but I did shoe them, and I had experience. Bloody, it was a bit of short, but good. And this particular case, one horse he couldn't get his foot, couldn't get him to come good, and we kept tapping him. And Harry Smith said to me, Ron, he said, I think we better try to find out where the trouble is in that hoof. So we got it up, and Harry held him, and I turned the knife around and around and around and bored a bloody hole in his hoof, and out come all the matter, you know, the rubbish. And when it did, we washed him out with kerosene and plugged it up with a bit of clean rag, or any rag in it, and put the shoe on top of it, and we had the horse to work. In a couple of days, he was back at work. And he was lame for nearly a fortnight, couldn't bloody walk. Poor bugger's hoof was all festered up in under the shell, in the shell of the hoof, and we went up through it and let it out, just like a fingernail into the... Now that's right, that did happen. That happened at Pine Cove.
To pull logs, the harness, the trace chains, the collars, had to be specially made for the logging, the pulling of the log. From the log to the first horse is called a shoe horse. The next one to him, and so on till you got out to the leader. The chains, what was back from his collar, from Hames from his collar back to the log, was straight off that, straight back. But if the other horses if he was hooked up here close to him, it'd be pulling down, and all the other horses in front would be putting too much pressure on that horse's back. So they had to have drop links, what they call drop chains, coming down onto running back, way back towards the log, and gradually worked up to the front horse, so that there was pulling, each horse when they took the strain was pulling on a straight pull off the log. It was good blacksmiths. Old John Lacey was a blacksmith in Strahan, and that's all he done in those days, was make harness, trace chains, aims and things like that, all horsework. Horseshoes, the shoes had to be the toe bars on them so they could grip, not slip. Toe bars, and the heels of the shoes was at least an inch cog on each corner of the hind part of the shoe, and across the front was a equally amount of toe bar. And they could grip, I can tell you what, and send the stones and mud flying as they sort of did slip a bit. And yes, there was a lot of work and art in making those type of things. The dog chains, what went around through the logging shoe, back onto the log, drove into the log to pull. They was all expertly made so they wouldn't rip out along if a log got caught and jammed. One of the dogs what drove into the side had a little, wasn't quite as much hook on that, so it'd draw, when it was drove in, it'd draw the chains tight. There was quite an art in making those things, and old Mr. Lacey was an expert.
What about looking after your horses in the forest? Did the wet conditions play up with the horses? Did they find that problem?
Well, because the Gordon is an area of rainforest, and we certainly got our fair share of rain. More than enough at times. The shoe roads would bog up, lots of places, particularly in deep peat, had to be close corded with spars across, 5 and 6 foot long, or slabs placed in. Otherwise they'd bog down. And they'd trench out too deep. Logs of bigger girth logs would get stuck in them and that sort of thing. Wasn't very happy getting a log out of a jam like that. It was called standing the logging shoe, which was at a curve on it, fitted under the log. And if a log got stuck, you'd have to try and get the shoe out and stand it in front on its end like that. The dog chains, what was pulling the log, you'd unhook them and feddle it back up through the hole in the shoe, and the horse was hooked on it. And when it pulled, that acted as a lever to lift the end of the log to get them started again. There was a lot in it, a lot of work, hard work, standing shoes in the mud, up to your knees in the mud. Yeah, the slippery ground on the steep hills you're coming down. The horses have to be full gallop at times to keep out of the way of the log running up onto them. Some places you had to use what was called a rough chain. You'd stop on the top of the hill, lay a big chain, heavy chain out, pull the log to nearly the centre of it, and run the end of through a big link and dog it in further along the log. And that chain acted as a drag to stop the log from shooting so fast, running so fast.
Being a teamster, you had to be capable of shoeing your own horses. So you had to have a little forge of some description. It seemed to be essential for a little hand forge or some way to warm your shoes up. That seemed to be the usual thing when you shoed your horse. You'd cut his hoof to a certain extent, then you finished up by getting the shoe nice and red and burning it on to get a nice fit. And there'd be a forge, a little forge, possibly an old anvil or a piece of railway iron to act as an anvil. There'd be chains laying around. There'd be what you call log shoes, which was a piece of mild steel, wide enough for your log to sit on, so as he'd have a rounded front on him and jump over logs or rocks or anything like that.
Where a log was to be hauled by a cable and a log shoe not used, the front of the log was pointed and a groove cut to take a wire strop.
Another thing, with the harness, it had to be placed right on the horses. The collars, the aims had to be right in the perfect place on the horse's collar to be pulled, so that when they pulled, it was squarely on the shoulder, not low, so it would pull low on him, or too high so it would choke his breath off. There was an art in everything. And if you didn't look after your horses correctly and have those things done, they got sore shoulders and that sort of thing. It was terrible to see horses with sore shoulders trying to pull. And my father would never have a horse in that sort of condition. They always had to be nicely polished up, look well, and no scars or marks on them. He was an expert.
Preparatory work for getting logs to the river was enormous. Some of the old shoe roads are still visible in the landscape today.
You shot logs in off banks or something if you're close to rivers or anything, or creeks, and you could shoot them in, but where you had to pull them a distance to shoot them into the river or whatever, a permanent shoot sort of thing. Probably some of them might be half a mile long or more than that to go down. They was cut out, and you took your risk. Then when you shot the logs over the banks, sometimes they'd go out of it and you'd see the trees bang bang, where they're shaking the heads of them where they'd go down through them. But mostly once they'd had a few, they'd channel their own way down through it. But they go like bullets, especially long ones. Short ones, they might tip them over and they might go on the end and up end and go crash down through the bush and that. Yeah, it's into the river. Mostly it'd go into the river, but if you had to hook onto them again and pull them again, which we had to do at Spring Creek, we had to pull them another 3 miles. And shoot in between. It was too steep to, like a cliff to go down. We had we had 2 sets of gear. We'd come in from the river in the morning. We had shoe chains and all the horse chains. We'd unhook those and leave them there and just go up a traverse track, which is zigzag to get up onto the top of the chute, and another set of chains up there to hook on and harness your team up and go back and get the log and come out to there and shoot it over. Of course, you'd 1 day for the trip. You'd only do the 1 trip. And it was a long way to pull them.
In the winter of 1936, there were 31 frosts in a row.
It was a time when we had perfect weather. Huge, long spell of frost which went for 36 days on end. Now, a lot of people, it'd be hard to believe that I saw ice in the Gordon River, in the eddies, up to 2 inches thick. And along the cliffs of the Angel Cliffs and other limestone cliffs where the lilies and the flowers hung down over it, and I've seen icebergs 8 or 9 inches long hanging off the end of the leaves of the things. And in some places where the drips went down, they was 4 and 5 foot in length and up to 3 inches at the butt, some of these icicles hang off the cliff. And Ron and I was boating chaff up the river mainly all that time, on and off, to different camps, mainly to keep the tucker up to the men in the Rocky Sprint. On the way up, of course, at times you misjudge a rock or something, you'd drop down up to your waist in the water, but it was cold. But while you're rowing, of course, you got a lot of strain on your arms and your legs, and your blood was pretty warm, so that we didn't get really that cold. It's only when you stopped to do something that you really got cold.
In the cuttings where the logs had trenched it out, over the years they got it real deep, now 20 feet deep, trenching it out. And they eventually caught it with big gum slabs, and it was pretty steep down. And when those frosts came and froze all the bottom of the cuttings, and the logs would shoot real fast, and the horses have to go full gallop ahead of them to stop the logs from running up on them. And sometimes the logs would come unhooked, and the teams would still keep going. You'd be running down along the bank, up on the bank, yelling, whoa, 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 but they'd keep going till they got there. Then you couldn't lead one back and turn him around to hook onto the logs or anything to start him up again. They'd stop running. You'd have to back the damn horse up the slippery cutting. It was a bug of a job to try and back him up, sliding and slipping to get back to hook onto the log, enough to start it to go down again. And there was a dreadful lot of frost at that time. All the bay was frozen over. the seagulls used to come down to, they didn't know the ice was there. They come down to land on the ice and they'd skid. Think of that little land on the water. But was that, oh yeah, it's real froze up. That was 1936. And that's,
I did look forward to getting home. Once you got home, of course, and the soft ground walking about, and I noticed that when you went down the street walking on the concrete footpaths and the roads and that, I used to get a bit like a horse and get shin sore on the front legs. And after a week or so, that would wear off again and you'd be right for the next trip back.
yes. You'd have, first thing you knew, you'd have a good sleep in. You'd sleep in lovely bed, you say, after being damn in a bloody old bunk. And the straw bunk was pretty tough. And you come home and have a nice sleep. And breakfast, you get up and Mum would have you a nice bacon and egg breakfast, plenty of nice buttered toast, and that's so beautiful. You're not loving cooking your own guy all the damn time. Yes, it was nice.
Okay. By now I had kids 3 and 4 and 5 years old, 6 years old. When I come home, they'd get around me, and of course the wife would sit over in a chair over there, but I'd have a kid on each side and one in front of me, and until they told me all their little secrets and all the little things that had happened while I was away, there's no way the wife could get her to say at all. She just had to sit back and wait. When they'd run out of steam, she'd get her say. I used to love it.
Mum never knew when we were coming. We never knew when we were coming. We've landed home all hours of the night when we rode home. You rode to Strahan and you tie your punt up and take your pack and go home. Just walk up the lane. It's heaven to be back home, yes. Go to the butcher's shop and you get a lump of steak, and it didn't matter how much fat and that was on it, you just cooked and grilled it and eat it like, oh, bloody beautiful. Fresh meat, you know. Bit of fresh steak and bit of bread you didn't have to cook and all that. Didn't worry about the old baker with a bit of burnt bread. Well, you cut that off and eat it, you're happy. I know, I was happy to come home, yes.
After I'd been in Strahan for 2 days, I was sick of it. Had I have been a drinker, I'd have lapped it up, because most of their time was spent in the hotel until their money had run out. They'd be blind drunk, day and night, for a week or fortnight. And that never ever appealed to me. I used to go and help other boat builders, work for nothing for them, just to get the experience, rather than have that way of life until it was ready to go back to the bush again. That's how I was. I was always keen to learn anything like that. But we used to take an interest in chopping and playing football.
We had a lot of entertainment, had to do it ourselves them days. A lady, Mrs. McDermott, and her daughters were musicians. Was a wonderful violin player, Mrs. McDermott, probably as good as you ever get anywhere. And daughter May used to play the piano, and we'd organise our own dances, set up and talk to people and put a bit of a notice in the window and run dances. And then the ships used to come in to pick up the copper and ore from Mount Lyell, the Kakariki and boats like that, and about once a month they would run a ball at Strahan, a beautiful ball. All the women around Strahan would cook all the blokes on the boat would cook all the food necessary for the ball, and we had wonderful evenings. And then a month or so later, the Strahan people would then run a dance or a ball for the boat people, the sailors, and had wonderful nights and enjoyed, and plenty of dancing and so on.
The publican was always a shrewd chap, and he knew what to do to get customers. He worked things that way. Yes, well, when you'd have your chops in them days, You didn't have your irons like you got them now, where you can put your log on them and screw them up like and all that sort of thing. And it was for a reason. They had a big piece of grass. It used to be up the back of the hotel up there. And they'd get a load of mill waste, slabbings and that sort of thing, that they'd use for firewood. And they'd just get a dray load of these things dumped there. And they'd give you some 3-inch nails or 4-inch nails. And you had to now set your own block up with getting pointy pieces of wood and putting your block on logs and hitting them in with axes and nailing them onto the end, which all took time. All took time. But of course this is just what they needed because the pub was real handy. And even when you had your heat to chop, you'd always have to send for somebody who you knew was in there to come out. Someone else had got his log ready for him and all this sort of thing. Well, of course, after the chop was over, straight back into the hotel. And you'd have to discuss it, why you didn't win, why the other fella did win, and the unfair start that he had, jumped the gun. And this is what you'd be living with all the time in the hotel, until you was ready for the next heat. And of course, in the meantime, the beer would be flowing quite freely. Yes. And this is what used to happen with them punt races I was telling you. Before the race, after the race. They commenced like in the hotel. Yeah. He still reckons he was better than what the fella that won it. And he was willing to wager a private race with him. And you'd get all this sort of...
During the late 1970s and early 1980s, the debate concerning damming the Gordon River downstream of the Franklin was a very hot issue. It divided families and friends. Ill feeling lingered for many years.
And I'd had arguments in supermarkets up there. I'd stand up in the box, I'd say, "You're wrong, you're mad, you people. They ought to give the place away. It's no damaged, building a dam there, it's a good thing." And I was all for it. But then, since the dams were stopped and the tourism started, and they made Pine valuable from a tourist point of view, the rivers valuable from a tourist point of view, I feel they've done the right thing. The dam was not to be there. That's the right thing to do, not to build. Because they've made a valuable asset to Strahan and the district, the whole of Tasmania, has benefited by not building the dam.
On my 21st birthday, I boarded the train in Strahan and never come back.
There's still a lot of Yuan pine around. There's still a lot down the Spear. There's still a lot up the Gordon River and the tributaries. But it's in inaccessible places. You see, it more or less had to be manhandled because wherever that Yuan pine grows, if it's on a swamp, you've got the swamp to consider, like I was just telling you. And where it grows up the Gordon River and the tributaries, there's always some obstacle where you can't get to it for some reason or other. They manage to get horses into it and pull it down little tracks, little tributaries and that sort of thing. But it's always been very hard to get. In fact, the convicts used to roll it quite a distance, just roll it, where they had to cut the forest out as wide as what the tree is. Oh yes, they used to rely a lot on rolling roads, the convicts. Yes. There's still a lot of Yuan pine around. Still a lot around. And always will be.
After having 3, sometimes 4 months, and I've said I've had 6 months at a time in the Gordon, never seemed to worry about Strahan too much as long as your tucker was hanging on and going on, and just as soon to be there as anywhere else at the time. I was that happy with it all. It was a real complete interest to me to be one of the piners that I'd grown up as a boy and and saw them all coming to Strahan into the pubs having their beer and beards on and old flannels hanging out of them and torn trousers. And it's one of the greatest things that I've ever done in my life, I think, to be a part of the Gordon River timber cutters.
Yes, but of course, even when I was a piner, it was more or less just looked upon as a living, an independent living. You was working for nobody, you were working for yourself. And that was more or less the attraction. There was just a bare living in it. There was no money to be made in it at all. And like you lived hard and put up with a terrible lot. And the living was really hard. It was really a hard life with no frills at all.
No, I don't think you could say we loved it. Not at any time. We respected the bush, we respected the rivers, but never did we love it. The greatest call we had was to be able to give the place to the blacks. We hated the isolation and the loneliness. We'd be sometimes 3 months you never saw another person, you see. And we didn't like that. But we did admire what we were doing. We liked cutting the timber, we liked cutting the logs for the mills, we liked selecting them. We didn't particularly like having to pull them to the water, but we did. But we liked all that aspect of it, defining it and actually falling the trees and well, you got a lot of satisfaction out of finding a good tree, and you go home and you talk about it at night, you say, you had a good one today, wasn't it, you know? And that gave you satisfaction.
You had to go there whether you liked it or not for a living that you liked doing. Now, when I've been back lately as a tourist, I enjoy it a lot more than when I used to live there and work there. Different altogether.
Makes sense.
You see, I've got another brother. He lives in Queenstown at the present time, a blacksmith. Oh no, he died now. He described the Gordon, leech-ridden, full of black snakes, wet, cold, hard. Let 'em have it. That was his idea of it. But of course others see it in a different light.
How do you see it?
Well, I see it as some place nice to work in. Nice to work in. Yes, well, the camps along the Gordon was very colourful, in a way which is hard to explain. They had a clearing on a dry bank, and it seemed as though they could get it cleared. They'd have their camp, one end of it. They'd have stables on the other end of it. The horses wasn't allowed a lot of room to move about. There'd be oddments around.
I'll always look back at the Gordon, put the tough times with the good times, and I think there was more tough times than good times, but there's nothing that I wouldn't do again if I possible to return to the age that I was in them days.
The last 30 minutes of this archive comprise clips not necessarily related to the foregoing or each other.
Well, Dad's father started in the King River. He was pining at the mouth of the King River. I don't know the dates, but it was 1880, that sort of time. It was before the railroad was built, and it used to be a pack horse deliverer of mail, go up the King and ride into Queenstown and back again. And all I know about the old grandfather's place is that he invited the pack horse driver to stay overnight with him, and he put it in his journal what he'd seen and what had happened in that overnight stay. He said Mrs. Abel had made a camp into a home by converting kerosene cases into seats with covers and chintz covers and cushions, made wardrobes out of cases, and when you went into the whole house, it looked like a house and was a home. And he said that was the first time he'd been in a piner's camp that was a home. And that's all I ever knew about my grandmother. My first memory is him being drunk on the bank of a creek at West Strahan, where we used to live while my mother was alive. And he was laying on the bank in the grass having a snooze, and I was laying with him, having a snooze with him, and I could smell the beer on his breath. And I had a great afternoon with my father. That was a very good first memory.
And what's your first memory of him going off pining and him coming back?
When my mother went to a sanitarium, I was fostered out to different homes around Strahan. And while I was fostered out, Dad was away in the rivers. From the time I was 7, I suppose, we used to go away and come back and go away and come back all the time. I used to know where he went. I just knew he went up the river and he came back again. My brothers, when they grew older, went with him. And they formed a gang on their own. Dad and 3 boys called the Mosquito Gang. And they started when they were about 12, 13, 14 years of age. And they went up to Gordon with Dad then. And these were in 1920, around about then.
And how old were you when you first went down the Gordon with your father?
I went for a holiday with him first, down to where they're cutting a track from Kelly Basin over to the Spence River mouth to put a telephone line into the service of people down the Gordon. The line never came to fruition, but we were camped on the bed of the Spence River. That's where I heard Digby for the first time. And I went outside to relieve myself before I went to bed, and this terrible scream. I rushed back in. I said, "Who the hell was that?" He said, "Don't worry about that. It was Digby. He won't hurt you. You stay inside. And Digby won't touch you." I didn't find out for quite a long time later that Digby was a screech owl, a night owl. And this terrible scream he gave was when he was looking for game to catch to eat. So if ever you're in the bush overnight and you hear Digby calling, you'll know that somebody's died or something's died.
The timbers?
It was a prize, but particularly for boat building. It was well recognised to be one of the best timbers in the world for boat building. So we used to search for boat building logs. But when I built my little mill, one of the best customers I had was a firm in Victoria that made hat blocks, of all things. Now, I don't know if you know what a hat block is or not. But they used to mould felt hats on hat blocks. Ladies, beautiful little cocky hats they made, moulded on a hat block. And under steam pressure and all that sort of thing. And pine would stand the pressure, the changes in temperature. And these people would pay good money for a hat block timber. So that was a popular.
The Gordon River splits were too difficult to navigate with a piner's punt.
My father was involved with the splits 1923. And he went up through there with one of the surveying gangs. And he knew that it was a split, that it wasn't underground water. But he saw young pine up there too, between the splits. But he didn't think it was worthwhile worrying about it, too far away. But then, in the late 1920s, he got together with one of the Dohertys, and they went up and they started to look at the pine with a view of milling it. And they saw then, those days, the Maxwell and the Denison timber that the Morrisons got now, but they said it was too hard to get, didn't worry about that. But they thought they could get the stuff from the splits when it was done. The splits are just a gorge. Yes, if you look at it in the right tone of voice, it'd be beautiful. If you're looking at it with the idea of going through it or getting over it, it's not very nice.
In them days, really, there was quite a little bit of feeling, I don't know whether you'd call it friction or not, but there were the Irish, and they were piners and mostly descendants of the convicts. And they claimed to be from Port Davey in the early days and the real true piner. Others was more or less regarded as blow-ins, more or less. The Irish seemed to be the ones, of course they were mostly descendants of convicts. They'd been in the pine in Port Davey, and of course they come around later on. And they got into the pine in the Gordon River, pitch all their logs like, and well, that was of course the early beginning of their forefathers, but they more or less thought that they carried the tradition on and were the true piners. There was others come in later on. This was where there was a little bit of friction between the Irish and the English. In Strahan there was English, like MacDermott's, Londoners and that sort of thing. They more or less looked upon the English as being the cause of their forefathers being sent out here on frivolous cases.
In 1932, a young Ron Penny went pining in the Franklin River with that most respected bushman, Charles Abel.
That was one of the greatest features of my life, I reckon, because it was only old Charlie and I. They call him Barnes. There's only the two of us.
Still got too much. It's too centred. Keep an eye on that one.
There was only the two of us, and we went. And Charlie took me up the Franklin, and he was a marvellous man, that river. He was marvellous. He taught me how to use an axe, and he taught me to left and right handed, and he said, you do it left and right handed and do it. I'd done everything, and to this day I still haven't forgotten. I never forget what you're taught when you're young. But anyhow, as I said, that's my experience. And him and I, we were up there for 3 months, and we never got any rain, enough rain to wash. We got little floods, but we weren't ready. And when they come, anyhow, we run short of food. And we went out, walked over to Eagle Creek, I think. Walked over to Eagle Creek and borrowed a boat. We rowed to Strahan, and I had to go and approach Mr. Henry for some more food. And he gave me another, I think it might have been 16 or 20, I can't remember for sure, I can't. But we got back to Eagle Creek, and the two of us, and we took a pack each and started off. I think old Charlie must have had 100 weight on him, I don't know. But I had a hell of a load on me for a boy, and we got up on the top of the hill and couldn't make it. On that particular day I couldn't make it into the river. We stayed at that night, we stayed in the bush overnight, went back to camp the next day, and that was an experience I've never ever forgotten. We got the timber out anyhow and paid our bills, and that's the first real money I ever had. I bought me worst suit of clothes. I think that it seemed to be a happy gang. There never seemed to be any problems in that respect. Some carried a mattress, but I never ever had a mattress. You leave home with blankets only. Oh, we made our bed. I better be cute with you. The bed was made with 2 chaff bags. 2 chaff bags and 2 poles and 4 forks and 2 cross pieces. So spread her out, 2 forks at the end of the pole like that, and the bags was cut to fit in them, and that was your mattress. You put your bed blankets in on that and laid in it. Made a good mattress. You could put some tussocks of that in it, or yeah, tussocks they were good. They made a good bed. Yep, put your blankets on and lay on it.
Wet? Were you wet?
Well, if you was wet, you were often damp. You was wet, yeah, more times. Your clothes was dried. You had a big open, we had what you call a firefly in the tent. I'm talking now, you want to know in the tent, don't you? That's what you want to know. We didn't have huts. After that fire, there was no huts. I don't know what they've done of late years, but there was no fire, no huts up where we were pulling logs. We had tents. We used the iron and bits and pieces, whatever was left, and built it up.
I remember, of course, this was quite a while ago when I was only about, I'd only be about 9-year-old, I reckon. We lived at the Braddon River. We had quite a lot of pine come out of the Braddon River, and my mother was there, and our family was there really, and some of the old docketies, they were then working up the Gordon River in the lower parts of the Gordon River. And one old chap in particular, old Charlie Doherty Massa, we used to call him. Oh, he was a character, really, and he always grew a beard, and he looked, the part of the real old timers. Well, my mother, in where we used to live, we used to have a lot of bee trees where the wild bees used to make their honey, their hives. There's in plenty of them, and there was a plentiful supply of honey. And my old mum used to make a honey mead. And this honey mead was real lovely, real sparkling, and very intoxicating, but very nice. Well, this old Charlie Doherty especially, when he used to row his punt from the Gordon River up to Strahan to get supplies, often Macquarie Harbour could get quite rough at times. And of course they was often weather-bound, and they used to call into Settlement Island, or if they come around our way, they'd call into the Braddon River, which Phillip Island is just out from them. They'd sneak up around the shoreway. But this old Charlie Doherty, I remember when I was a kid, I used to think, by God, he's a crafty old fella, because he used to be often weather-bound when the weather was quite good, like. And my old mother used to make him a cup of tea and some scones, and I used to lap these into him, but his eyes was always waiting for this honey mead, what Mum used to say, would you like, Mr. Doherty, a drink of honey mead? And oh yes, lady, I'd love a drink. You make such beautiful mead, and you make such lovely scones, and I used to think he's a cagey old fella, this bloke is, like, the way he used to get around Mum. Until it would go from 1 cup of honey mead to 2 cups, and then it often used to get to a 3rd cup. Well, by the time this old chap used to leave, he was in terrible good spirits to do the remainder of his journey. Oh. Do you know a lot of them early pioneers, them Dohertys, they used to cart a dog about with them to catch. They'd go ashore on one of the banks to rouse a wallaby out for a bit of fresh meat. They'd cart their camp oven with them. If they was lucky enough and they had done fairly well, they might have a leg of ham to cut a bit of bacon off. They'd have this damper, this bread. Their tea would be mostly in the Gordon River, a tin over the side. This, where the water wasn't brackish, this was their tea that they used to have. Their food would be in a bag or something in the back of the punt, with the row punt. The dog would be laying on it, the big hound dog. He'd be laying alongside your food, alongside a bit of bacon and that sort of stuff. And this is how they used to live. They lived like this for a long time and never went near a hospital. That's the Dohertys, the old Irish. We had a family here, the Abels. Those nearly as hard. 3 brothers. Those nearly as hard. A lot of the memories really was when there used to be a boat here, they called it the Glen Turk. It was an old scow-built boat that used to carry blackwood logs on this deck when there was 5 sawmills in Strahan, really. And it used to carry a lot of deck cargo instead of bringing them up in rafts. You had to have favourable weather.
Morrison brothers, when working in the Franklin in the early 1940s, encountered a severe blizzard when walking out for supplies.
Decided that we'd better go out and next day and get some supplies. And that night it was a very cold night, cold and rain and odd snowflakes falling. And anyway, we got up at 8 o'clock and got going next day to go out and get a pack. And on the way out, of course, as we went up, it was very steep up out of the Franklin to get onto the button grass to go along the Raglan Range. And as we got up, of course, it was snow on the ground, and then it got thicker and thicker, and higher we went, the thicker it got. And the time we got up to the top, or almost at the top of the Raglan Range, it was probably 2 or 3 feet deep. And we were at a job to walk in it because it was all fresh snow, and as you trod on it, it would go down a certain depth and then go down another 6 or 8 inches. And so that you was almost up to your knees in snow. And but before that, when we first got up to the foothills of it, it was that thick and clouded in that we could hardly see one other 6 or 8 feet apart. So I went the way that I used to go. I used to go along to the right and pick up a spur and go around the cliffs. And the others used to go up between the rocks and up onto the top that way through this pass. But how we got there, I don't know, because you could only barely see. And knowing the grade of the country and that, and is how we got there. But when I reached the top and walking and staggering along, I could hardly see anything at all on the top. And I thought, well...
Why couldn't you see anything at all?
I couldn't see anything because of the low cloud and the fine, hard sleet that was blowing about 40 mile an hour, and that was cutting right into us. Even my eyebrows was covered in ice. Our bed, which we'd had for about 3 months, and it was frozen over, and there was flannel over flannel. We used to wear an over flannel to run the rain off us, and the over flannel was just like a paling. You could hit the flannel, it was like a stiff board. So anyhow, creeping along, and I thought, well, I'm not going to walk here because I must be somewhere around where these cliffs drop down 20 or 30 feet. So I get down on my hands and knees and crawling and feeling and walking and moving about. A lot of people would never believe this, but I could feel and I couldn't feel anything, so I thought, well, this has got to be the edge of something, so I felt as far as I could and went back and got up on my feet again and started to take her easy and step and walk a little bit and run right into me other 2 brothers. So we just about fell on the ground laughing because it was so, we'd run into each other without seeing each other. But I had Claude with us, and he was about 12 years older than me, and we were plodding along, and we could see a little bit better. It lifted a little bit, but you could only see about 100 yards, and a lot of young, old growth King Billy that was under them grew up on top there, but they only grew to about 8 or 10 foot high, and nice little logs could have been got out of them though. And you could, every time you stepped behind the one in front of you, it started to look a greeny colour and all different colours. And so my brother got a bit crook of it, and he said, I don't know whether I can keep going. I said, you can keep going, you've got to keep going. So we had a bit of a spell for 5 minutes. You couldn't light a cigarette. There was no way in the world you could get your matches out of your pocket or even do a wee. You had to go down, let it go inside, because you couldn't move your hands, couldn't have a smoke, because your hands wouldn't work to strike the matches. So things were getting pretty quick, and we struggled on a bit further, and I thought, well, we've got to be on the top. And Ron thought we ought to be on the top too, and Claude got down. He said, you'll have to leave me. He said, I can't go any further. All his arms were all swelled up, both his arms, and right to the elbows, it all swelled up twice the size of his arms, or whatever was wrong with him, I didn't know. But anyway, well, I said, unless God does something for us here, we look like will be bones, a lot of us, the four of us, on the top of the mountain. Within 10 minutes of I said that, all of a sudden the sky just cleared off, swept away for about 20 minutes, and we could see all around us, and of course we knew where to go. And we were right on the top, so the only way to get out of it was to get down off it. So we run and fell and stumbled and end over end down out of it, and otherwise we would still be there. We eventually got down low out of it and started to get the snow lightening down a bit. And my brother was driving horses for Cliff Bradshaw, pulling timber out of the top end of the Loddon River. There was a steep place where they used to haul them up out of it, and then they would pull them with the horses out to the West Coast Road. And there was a fella who used to camp about halfway into the road, and he used to look after the horses if they ever went away and that. And we walked into the camp, and he nearly went out the other end of the camp because he couldn't believe the condition that we were in, with all this frozen stuff all over our beds and stuff. So he raced a kerosene tin full of water onto the fire, and he bathed the brother's arms, and he had a piece of corned beef he'd cooked earlier, and he cut it and cut us about 4 of these great toasted sandwiches and corned beef, and just about saved our lives. And after a while we ventured on down the track out to where my brother Jim lived at the West Coast Road with his wife Nita, while he was driving the horses. And I remember we got changed, and with fresh clothes. He had plenty of clothes there, and we had a bit of tea, and we went to bed then. And of course there was no way in the world you could have any blankets. It was 6 inches of snow at the road on at the where he was camped on the West Coast Road there, and there was no way you could sleep. It was that hot that you couldn't believe it, with so much cold snow and chill around the place. And I asked a doctor about it once. He said, well, it was the blood beginning to return and flow freely through your body. With all the rough and the tough times and the good times we had, there's something about the Gordon that made it hard to ever leave, because you get the winter with the rain and the hail and the snow and all the boating of chaff and packing through snow and over mountains and shooting logs. But in the summertime, when the river had cooled off and calmed down and the rivers was low, to travel and drift down the Gordon in the summertime, it's a marvellous place. There's something about the forest, the smell of it, the leatherwoods, all sorts of things that grow there that has a smell all of its own. And if I had to do it all again, if I could return to an age to be able to do it, I would do it all over again, provided the timber was put back in place as well. After the big flood in the Rockies, Charlie Abel and I had the job of rafting and dropping the logs down to the mouth of the Gordon where the boats could tow them away, save all the extra towing. And I remember drifting down one night. Was going down with about 250 logs in a raft. The moon was full, perfect night, and if there's any place like heaven, that'd have to be it. The reflections of everything that was in the sky, any scatter of a cloud or anything, you could pick it up in the water like it was real. And the yew and pines hanging over the river like weeping willows was a marvellous sight. And the smell and the freshness and beauty and wonder of it all is a marvellous thing to have had anything to do with. And I hope that it'll always stay like that forever.
But things was left a bit too late. A lot of the things of 10 years there beforehand, they'd got some great stories from the old piners. Your dad and Uncle Jim and old 90 Ware, they'd have been about the last of the old piners. Oh, we put in our nights all right. You'd be pretty tired by the time you fed the horses and that you was pleased to hop into the bunk. Great times though, really. Hard.
The Piners Archive is the 10th in Gary Kerr's Australian Maritime History series of documentary DVDs. Others include Two Men in a Punt, In the Wake of the Huon Piners, Trading Out of Stanley, an oral history on film, Crayfishing Around Tasmania, a fisherman's perspective, Wooden Ships and Stockmen, the passing of an era in the Bass Strait Islands, The Pearl Shell Divers, Australia's deadliest catch, The Last Cape Horners, the end of the great sailing ship era, The Trading Catches of South Australia, an oral history on film, The Cooter Boat, return of a classic, and Trading Out of Hobart, an oral history on film.